Okay, hi everyone. This is Danielle Karapkin speaking to you from Thornhill, Ontario for webyeshiva.org, and I hope everyone is well. We're going to be dedicating our studies today to the memory of my beloved father, Lipa ben Yecheskel HaKohen, whose yahrzeit is today, Pesach Sheni. And we are beginning today Treatise 1, or Ma'amar Rishon. You can call it the first treatise, you can call it the first essay, whatever you'd like to call it. We have completed the Hakdama, the introduction to Emunot V'Deot, where Rabbi Saadia Gaon had emphasized for us his project, what he hopes to achieve with this work, which is to be able to logically prove the faith claims of Judaism that are found in Tanakh and in our sages, using the methodology of the current philosophy of his time in the 10th century. And he believes that that is a necessary endeavor because the intellect is very much a part of our service to God, to be able to satisfy ourselves intellectually that the statements and the claims and the doctrines of Judaism are logical and are satisfying to us. That helps us become closer to God. We are starting today the first Ma'amar, the first what Rosenblatt calls the first treatise, and there's actually an interesting hakdama to the first essay. So it's not the hakdama, but it's the hakdama to the first essay that we're going to be studying primarily today. And so in order for us to get our bearings, let me bring up a screen that I'm going to share. Let's see, share. Okay, so as we had spoken about last week when the Hakdama of Rabbi Saadia had given us a small table of contents of sort, we were told that the first essay, or the first treatise, was going to be dealing with the concept of creation. And essentially what Rabbi Saadia is going to be discussing is the idea of cosmogony, or the origins of our reality, the origins of our universe, of our existence. Now, we all know that the Torah's assertion is that Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created heaven and earth, so that there was a creation. But it is important to know that that was not the consensus of medieval philosophy. As a matter of fact, the more popular model, or the more popular idea of the origins of the universe, is that the universe eternally existed. Those of you who were with us when we studied the Rambam's Guide for the Perplexed know that this is the Aristotelian model, and that this is something that the Rambam had to seriously contend with, because the Rambam was a staunch Aristotelian. And this is one of the few areas where he realized that he had to take issue with Aristotle. And his way of taking issue with Aristotle was to say that basically Aristotle got everything correct within the sublunar realm, meaning within our realm of existence. But once you get up into the cosmos, Aristotle could not have a very clear observation of what was going on into the cosmos. And therefore, even though his observations of the cosmos led him to believe, and his philosophical logic led him to believe that the world has always existed infinitely through time immemorial, nonetheless, that does not seem to be consistent with the Torah's presentation. And the Rambam therefore set out to prove, using logical argumentation, that indeed the world was created in time and has not eternally existed. So we're going to do the preface to this essay to demonstrate that the world was created in time, and then we're going to start chapter 1 of the first essay. And the chapter 1 is comprised of a hakdama, an introduction or a preface, and then 4 chapters. So if you wanted to follow along in the translated text, and I've mentioned before that Rosenblatt's translation of Saadia's Emunot V'Deot, in my opinion, is okay. It's acceptable. but it's really not something that I think will carry us through, us English speakers throughout. I think there's a lot, it needs a lot of work. And so but it does start on page 38 in the Rosenblatt edition of the English translation. So number one, we want to demonstrate that the world was created in time. Our first premise, Reb Sadia says, is that anyone seeking to understand the origins of the universe must acknowledge that one is venturing into a realm that no one ever witnessed. This is an important point that Reb Sadia is going to be emphasizing again and again. There are certain things that you want to be able to prove that are provable through bringing them into a laboratory, making observations, and either using deduction or induction in order to be able to conclude that something is true. Now, recall, as we've mentioned before, Rabbi Sadia lives long before the scientific method is made into a necessary methodology in scientific inquiry. So Rabbi Sadia largely used inductive reasoning, in order to come to conclusions, which is what all philosophers did in that time, because they had not yet come to the realization that if you want to be able to prove something, it has to be provable through experimentation and verification in multiple different settings. Rather, what philosophers did is they made observations of the universe around them, and based on those observations, they came to certain conclusions of what reality is like. And that went on until probably the 18th century. Okay, and that's where we get all of these different models of the universe that later were debunked because of experimentation. Now, what Reb Sadia is saying here is that when we try to figure out the origins of the universe, we're even at a greater disadvantage. Not only can we not experiment in a laboratory, but we can't even make observations and say that through those observations we can conclude certain things about the reality of our universe. And the reason is because no one was around to witness what happened at the time of creation, and what is being suggested is that the reality of what happened at the time of creation is not relatable to our reality in any way, shape, or form. Because what we're going to be suggesting, Reb Sadia says, is that there was something that was created from nothing. And that is not something that is replicable. That's not something that we can observe in our world today. We don't have any experience in our world today where something comes from nothing. The concept of creatio ex nihilo is so foreign to our frame of reality. Creation of something from nothing is so foreign because nothing in our reality spontaneously comes to existence from nothing. It therefore cannot be proven scientifically, that is, to be demonstrated and replicated in a laboratory, but rather it can only be inferred logically. All you have is your mind to be able to say, here's what makes sense, through a series of logical argumentations, multiple lines of proofs. Once one acknowledges this, then after one has proven creation from nothing as logically sound, meaning that creatio ex nihilo makes sense, it would be wrong to attempt a different way of viewing the cosmogony of the universe. Now, I'm just pointing out parenthetically, it would seem that what is going unsaid here is what Reb Sadia had established in the introduction, part 6, that God wishes for man to speculate the faith claims of Judaism, but only after accepting them as doctrinal truths based on the transmission of the prophets. After one has accepted what our prophets have told us as being the gospel, if you'll allow the metaphor, as being something that we must accept, as being dogmatic, as being doctrinal, as part of Judaism, then one is obligated to prove those doctrinal assertions logically. That is why it would be inappropriate, says Reb Sadia, after establishing the logical soundness of the doctrine of creation ex nihilo, to try to logically explore some other explanation for the origins of the universe. If our prophets have told us that the universe was created in time, then we should try to find a logical proof for that. Once we find a logical proof for that, we should consider our work to be finished. We are not going to be able to explore any further, nor is there going to be any other logical work that we have to do to try to, let's say, argue to the contrary. It is virtuous to logically demonstrate to oneself even those things that are distant from the human experience and that no one has ever witnessed. And Reb Sadia cites as a verse, remember, Reb Sadia's conception of intellectual inquiry is unbounded. It is totally fine for Reb Sadia for a Jew to delve into the greatest, deepest secrets of things that far trespass beyond the human mind and beyond a four-dimensional time space. The way that Reb Sadia had explained this back in section 6 is to tell us that even though our sages in the Mishnah in Tractate Chagiga had taught us that you're not supposed to try to explore what is above, what is below, what is before, and what is after, all they meant to say was, don't try to use logic to figure out or to create theories that contradict what our prophets have told us. But if you first accept the doctrinal teachings of our prophets, and if after that you use logical argumentations to verify what the prophets have taught us, then the Mishnah does not restrict you at all. And based on that, Reb Sadia says, but when you look in Ecclesiastes and it says, Rachok Mashahaya, it is very distant to try to figure out what happened in history, in ancient history when the creation first happened. The Amok Miyim Tza'enu. And it is so deep that who can actually discover it? Now, Rashi, contrary to Reb Sadia, understands the verse as follows. The Amok, it is so deep, who miyim tza'enu, who can discover it? She'ein li rishut laharher bahen. I have no right to even think about these things. Malamayla, malamata, malafanim, umaleachor. I have no right to try and discover what is above, what is below, what is before, and what is after. In other words, according to Rashi, this is what Shlomo HaMelech was saying in Kohelet, as saying who is going to be able to discover these things. It is actually Shlomo who's saying, don't try to discover certain things about the issues of creation. It's not worth it. It's not something that our sages say you have a right to do. But Reb Sadia disagrees. Reb Sadia had noted that our sages never forbade speculation in these matters. They rather required us to accept certain truths before proving them, and then exhort us to investigate them afterwards. So according to Reb Sadia, this verse means the exact opposite of the way Rashi understands the verse. It means, yes, it's very deep. Yes, it's very difficult to understand, but you can still explore it and try to provide logical argumentation to prove the claims of creation from nothing, and don't shy away from it. The only thing that the pasuk is telling you, however, is don't think that you'll be able to demonstrate it beyond using logical argumentation. There is no way to replicate such a phenomenon in our frame of reality. Once we are able to prove the concept of creation from nothing logically, we should not challenge our proof by saying, how can we acknowledge a thesis that we've never seen any semblance of in our frame of reference? Because, as we've stated, we started the investigation with that premise all along. We should rather accept our conclusions and rejoice in them, having accomplished what we set out to do. And this Reb Sadia continues and he says, I write this only to anticipate those challengers who may demand that I prove the concept of creatio ex nihilo scientifically, seeking a living example of this phenomenon of spontaneous creation from absolute nothingness. But in reality, if there did exist such physical proof to spontaneous creation, it would not be necessary to prove it logically. Furthermore, there would not be any dissent or disagreement over the origins of our universe. It is only because such a phenomenon is unobservable to the senses that we must resort to logical proofs. So that's what he's trying to provide us with in the introduction. If we were able to demonstrate this in our frame of reference, there would be there would not be any conflict or disagreement as to the origins of our universe, as to the cosmogony of our reality. Do not think that any of the other theories of cosmogony are any better. That's the next point of Reb Sadia. You think Aristotle was able to prove his theory of the eternality of the universe based on demonstrations of things that exist in our frame. Without exception, each one demands that we argue from logic alone, since no other theory is within our frame of reference. Now, Reb Sadia now alludes to the other theories of cosmology that he will detail later in the first part of in chapter 1. Rabbi Sadia is going to detail for us all of the different theories of how the world comes into existence. Now, Judaism's assertion is that God created all of reality from absolute nothingness. Today, we accept that because we subscribe to the Big Bang theory. But in Rabbi Sadia's time, there was no way of proving that using physics and using astrophysics to actually demonstrate that we live in an expanding universe that seems to have started from one little kernel of existence. But today, it seems like the creation assertion of the Bible actually fits with modern scientific inquiry. Nonetheless, what Reb Sadia is going to present to us is that there are at least 4 different theories of how the universe came into existence, and each one of them can only be proven, can only be demonstrated logically, but not with scientific demonstration showing real life phenomena that can replicate what happened at the time of the origins of the universe. Those who promote the eternality of the universe, that is, remember, that's Aristotle's theory that the Rambam spent a lot of time discussing in the guide, a universe that has no beginning or end, cannot point to anything in our physical reality that is like that phenomenon. Show me something in our world, in our reality, that is eternal in its existence. Everything in our reality comes into being and then eventually dies. Whether it's a plant, whether it's a living creature, even a rock starts off coming from a larger mountain and then eventually erodes and fades into non-existence or into sand. The bottom line is that we live in a constantly changing universe where there is no sense of eternality. So even though there is no eternity that we can point to in our existence, Aristotle still felt that that was the most cogent explanation for the origins of our universe, that it's always existed. The dualists, Zoroastrians, Manichaeans, that we're going to talk about later on, they argue that there are 2 deities or 2 principles that united in order to produce or create our physical universe. But this too is something that has never been witnessed in our plane of reality. 2 completely opposing forces that combine to bring about something new has never been witnessed in our frame of reality. Those who promote another theory, we would call this the Platonic theory, that promote creation from primordial hule, formless matter. And we're going to talk about all of these theories in great depth. But just keep in mind that the Platonic theory is something also that the Rambam had referenced in the guide, where he suggested that Plato's theory is that there has always existed matter, but matter without form. Remember, using this hybrid kind of explanation for all of physical matter in our world, that it is a combination of matter and form. Well, before the actual creation experience or event, there was always eternal matter, but it had no form. And God imbued this formless matter with form at some point in history. So to suggest that at one time there was a type of matter that possessed no characteristics, neither heat nor cold, nor wetness or dryness, and then this formless matter converted to the formed matter that we have today. That's the third model of creation outside of the biblical narrative. This too has never been witnessed in our frame of reality. But in all the above alternate models of cosmogony, their proponents seek to prove their theories logically, even when physical evidence is impossible. We do the same, therefore, says Reb Sadia, for the Bible's narrative of creation, for the creation model. The key to remember, dear reader, is that despite the fact that this exercise of proving creation logically cannot be demonstrated physically, you should not be quick to reject it. Furthermore, realize that out of all the other theories of cosmogony, ours is the soundest for three reasons. In other words, Reb Sadia is not just saying that out of all of the theories of cosmogony, they are all on equal footing because none of them are provable using phenomena that we can observe in our frame of reality. Reb Sadia is going one step further, and he's saying that out of all of the theories of cosmogony, ours is superior. The creation model that is described, that is narrated by the Bible, is superior to the other three for three reasons. Reason number one, the proofs for creation are stronger than the other theories. Now, that's a very bold statement to make. What the Reb Sadia is essentially arguing is that the arguments in favor of creation in time are stronger than the arguments of Aristotle that the universe has eternally existed, and the other theories as well. Reason number two, any refutation of the creation model can be easily argued against, can easily be refuted. So all of the tainas, all of the complaints, all of the dissenting arguments that try to disprove the creation model, those themselves can be refuted. And finally, number three, the creation model has the advantage of having been corroborated by the Nevi'im, by the prophets, who, because they performed miracles, were able to confirm the veracity of their claims. When Nevi'im came to us, starting with Moshe Rabbeinu, they performed great miracles to demonstrate that they had been sent by God. When they taught us Bereshit, that in the beginning God created from nothing, that is the greatest proof to the logic that comes as a result that we do after that prophetic revelation. So those are the three arguments, and perhaps reason number three is the strongest reason, because logic can only take you so far. Maybe yes, maybe no. I can provide a logical argument for A. I can provide a logical argument for the opposite of A, and maybe the two of them may both be logically sound. But if one of them is weighted with the authority of a prophet, so then that certainly outweighs the other opposing theory. So that's how Rabbi Sadia concludes the Peticha, the introduction or the preface to his first essay, his first treatise. But I would like to give just a small amount of analysis because we've already studied together the Rambam's guide, and we also know that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has what to say on this matter. I just want to compare and contrast with Rabbi Yehuda Halevi and the Rambam. Remember, Reb Sadia has said this, and this is something that I don't think anyone will disagree with, is that you cannot demonstrate with physical manifestations of these theories. You cannot demonstrate that scientifically because there are no ways to replicate what is being suggested as the creation of something from nothing. However, all cosmogonical theories are the same. They are not demonstrable using science. So does that mean that according to Reb Sadia, they're all equally the same? No, Reb Sadia had made a specific point of saying that the theory of creation is a superior theory from a logical standpoint as well, not just from the fact that it has the authority of the prophets. Let's look at what Rabbi Yehuda Halevi has to say about that in the Kuzari. The Kuzari asked, how can the mind entertain an idea of creation if the opposite, Aristotle's theory of eternal existence, has already been proved? Now remember, the Kuzari is coming from a standpoint of using the voice of a secular king who seems just to subscribe to the conventional wisdom of the day. The conventional wisdom in Rabbi Yehuda Halevi's time was that Aristotelian science was the prevailing working science of the day, and that anyone who contradicted Aristotle didn't know what they were talking about. And it's on that basis that the Kuzari king is set up to say Aristotle is the prevailing science. How can you argue with it by suggesting what the Bible says, what the Torah says, that the world was created in time? So the rabbi's response to that is, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says, when was this issue ever proved? God forbid. The Torah never expects us to believe in things contradicted by evidence or proofs. The Torah does, however, recount miracles, that is, departures from nature, such as new creations or transformations of things, in order to teach about God's wisdom and his ability to act upon his will at a desired time. It is not true that the eternal existence theory has already been proved. The question as to whether the universe was created or has always existed timelessly is a deep one, and there are valid logical arguments that can be made for either side. Therefore, the only thing that tips the scales in favor of creation is a tradition that dates from Adam to Noach and down to Moshe's prophecies. That is undoubtedly more reliable than logical arguments. I just want to point out that Rebbe Yehuda Halevi is not a proponent of logical proofs being helpful to strengthening one's faith. He even believes that using logic alone, it's a coin toss between Aristotle's model of eternality versus the Torah's model of creation ex nihilo, which is more logically sound. It's a coin toss. There is no greater weight to the creation theory from a logical standpoint than Aristotle. And by contrast, you have Reb Sadia. Reb Sadia says, no, I believe that even from a logical standpoint, the creation theory is more cogent, is more logical, is more sound, and is more provable. Now, it's important to note that Reb Sadia was a rationalist. Rabbi Yehuda Levi is a counter-rationalist. He does not believe that you can rely on your intellect in order to prove these things. And that's why he says the only arbiter, the sole arbiter of truth is what is revealed to us by our prophets who performed miracles to demonstrate that they were sent by God. That's the only arbiter that we can rely on. Reb Sadia strongly disagrees. Rabbi Yehuda Levi, we know, lives after Reb Sadia. Perhaps he was coming partially as a polemic against Rabbi Sadia. It's not easily determinable. Now, by contrast, the Rambam, who goes after Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, seems to agree with Reb Sadia that it is important to affirm that while Aristotle's model makes sense and helps to answer certain questions, there are even more problems with it than the model of creation. And we're just quoting from the Mora Nevuchim, from the guide, section 2, chapter 16. And we're using the Feldman translation. He says, the methods by which the Mutakalimun proved the creation ex nihilo have already been described to me, and I have exposed their weak points. So first of all, the Rambam says, and this is quite interesting because remember, Rabbi Sadia lives during the times of the Kalamists, the Mutakalimun. So we would expect to see some of the arguments of the Mutakalimun presented by Reb Sadia to prove that creation actually happened the way the Torah describes it. So the Rambam first starts off by saying, I'm familiar with those proofs. Maybe he's familiar with them through Rabbi Sadia's Emunot V'Deyot. I reject them. They're weak arguments. As to the proofs of Aristotle and his followers for the eternity of the universe, they are, according to my opinion, not conclusive. They are open to strong objections, as will be explained. I intend to show that the theory of the creation as taught in Scripture contains nothing that is impossible, and that all those philosophical arguments which seem to disprove our view of creation contain weak points which make them inconclusive and render the attacks on our view untenable. Since I am convinced of the correctness of my method and consider either of the two theories, specifically the eternity of the universe and creation, as admissible, meaning there is a logical possibility that either of them could be true, I accept the latter on the authority of prophecy. I accept the creation model on the authority of prophecy, which can teach things beyond the reach of philosophical speculation. For the belief in prophecy is, as will be shown in the course of this treatise, consistent even with those who believe in the eternity of the universe, meaning even those who believe in an eternal universe will still acknowledge that God can communicate to man via prophecy. When I have established the admissibility of our theory, I will, by philosophical reasoning, show that our theory of creation is more acceptable than that of the eternity of the universe. And although our theory includes points open to criticism, I will show that there are much stronger reasons for the rejection of the theory of our opponents over the rejection of our theory. So both Reb Sadia and the Rambam believe that it is necessary to use the intellect as a tool for appreciating God's universe, and it is unlikely that God would require us to believe in something that is not intellectually sound or appealing, and is even more intellectually sound than any counter arguments or theories. So we put Reb Sadia and the Rambam on one side. We put Rabbi Yehuda Levi on the other side of this debate, whether the model of creation as described in the Torah is logically more sound than the theory of eternal existence, the way that Aristotle subscribes. Rabbi Sadia and the Rambam say that there's more weight to the creation model, and the Rabbi Yehuda Halevi says they're equally logical, and therefore the only arbiter is going to be Tanakh. Okay, with that said, let's just get our feet wet with chapter 1 of the first treatise. The scriptural evidence for creatio ex nihilo is from the Torah itself. As the Torah begins, Bereshit bara Elokim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz. Now that's all Reb Sadia says. Where do you see from that pasuk that the world was created from nothing? So Rav Kitover in his commentary says the inference is from the word bara, which is the verb for creation from nothing, as other verbs exist to describe fashion or forming from already existent matter, like yatzar and asa. The Rambam confirms this in Moreh Nevuchim, section 2, chapter 30, which we're not going to quote from right now. And the Ramban does as well in his Torah commentary to Genesis chapter 1. We'll just read a small quote from the Ramban. He says, Ve'ata shema perush hamikra al pshuto nachonu barur. Listen, he says, my reader, to the simplest reading of the text of the first verse of the Torah. HaKadosh Baruch Hu bara kol hanivraim me'afisa muchletet. God created all of existence from absolute nothingness. Ve'ein etzlenu b'lashon hakodesh b'hotzaat hayesh me'ayin ela lashon bara. The only verb that we have existent in the Hebrew language that describes such a phenomenon of creation from nothing is bet resh aleph, bara. Ve'en kol hana'asa tachat hashemesh olamayla hoveh min ha'ayin hatchala rishona. There is nothing else that exists in our realm of existence, our physical reality, whether in the terrestrial plane or whether in the cosmic plane, that was created from absolute nothingness. Everything has its origin point from some other primordial material. Aval hotzi min ha'efes hagamur hamuchlat yesod dak ma'od. Ein bo mamash. What did God create at the very beginning? At this Bereshit, God created some kind of primordial matter which did not have any real substance to it, aval hu koach mamtzi, but rather just had this ability to produce other things after it. Mukhan lekabel hatzura, ready to receive form. It almost sounds like the Ramban is combining the narrative of creation with the Platonic view that there was primordial matter that came first. V'latzeit min hakoach el hapoal, to go from potentiality to reality. V'hu hachomer harishon, this was the primordial matter, the very first matter. Nikra liyavanim huli, it is called by the Greeks hule. V'achar ha'hule lo bara davar avol yatzar ve'asa. After God created this initial primordial matter, he then formed the primordial matter into all of the things that we see and experience in our frame of existence. That it is from this primordial matter that God shaped and formed everything else. Now, as many people have written in modern works in Judaica, Dr. Gerald Schroeder is just one example in his book Genesis and the Big Bang. What the Ramban is describing is perfectly consistent with the Big Bang theory. So we won't go into that now in any greater depth, but I will say that whether or not Reb Sadia subscribes to exactly what the Ramban is saying is not clear, at least not from at this point, but certainly it is based on the word bara in that verse that Reb Sadia says we see that creation was ex nihilo, from absolute nothingness. He then brings a verse from Isaiah, which says, Ko amar Hashem go alecha v'yotzercha mi beten, so says God who redeems you and forms you from the womb. Anochi Hashem osekol, I am God who makes everything. Noteh Shamaim Levadi, I spread out the heavens, I alone, Roka Haaretz Me'iti, and I create a firmament of the earth that comes only from me. And so the only thing that seems to be added in this verse in Isaiah is that it is deflecting the concept of a certain kind of dualism or a belief in multiple deities that bring the world into existence. What Isaiah is adding is this kind of existence that is exclusively from God. And finally, the truth of creation can be inferred from all the miracles that God has wrought in order to verify that he was the creator, which is why we accepted this model. And I just want to point out that the miracles that God brought upon us in the time of the Exodus is something that verifies that God can act as a creator. Because if you believe in the eternality of the universe, it means that you believe in a completely immutable, unchanging universe. That's what Aristotle believed. And according to Aristotle, it would be impossible for there to be any miracles manifesting in our world, because since the world is completely unchanging, it's impossible for there to be any kind of miraculous phenomenon that departs from the laws of nature. So the very fact that God took us out of Egypt and split the Red Sea and brought 10 plagues is in itself a refutation of the Aristotelian model and a proof that God can act as a creator. So that's the reason, according to the Ramban in his commentary to the first of the 10 commandments in Exodus chapter 20, he actually says that's the reason why we say in our prayers that the Sabbath is Zecher Liyetziat Mitzrayim. It is a remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. Now, the Sabbath is a commemoration of creation, but no one was present at the time of creation. We therefore say that the Exodus bears witness to humankind of the reality of creation. So after having verified creation from scripture, I then set out to see if creation could be proven logically. I now realize that there are 4 logical proofs of the model of creation, which I will now provide. And this is where we will hold it for today. And next week, we'll look into the 4 logical proofs that lend support to the creation model. And this is, dear friends, where we will hold it today. Let me just see. Any questions? Yes, please.
So the Ramban, who discusses Bria, where all the elements came into being, and then Yetzira and Asiya occurred later. But we do see the term bara subsequent to Bereshis bara.
Yeah, yes.
How does Ramban reconcile that?
With the Taninim. Yes, I agree to that. I believe, I don't remember exactly, my memory is a little fuzzy, but I believe that the Ramban, or at least some of the commentaries say, that because the Taninim were of such a largeness of creation, meaning that they were huge behemoths, that they receive the attribution of bara, even though they too were really only formed from this primordial matter. Bara is also used to describe something that is so huge that it looks like it's coming from spontaneous nothingness, even though in reality, it did come from the primordial matter of this Hule that the Ramban is describing. But I believe that's the only example of bara that we find of a specific aspect of creation during the Sheshet Yemei Bereshit. But if you can go back and show me any other specific verses, I'd be happy to continue that discussion, okay? We're going to hold it here for today, friends. And let me wish you a good week, and we'll see you Bezrat Hashem next time. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.